Hello, folks who are joining us.
Welcome to the Common Objective and Biodiversify webinar. We've got an exciting program lined up for you. You can see that joining me as co-hosts on this call are Sam Sinclair, who's founder and director of Biodiversify. We also have Alex Ward of Aspect Climate Products, who's going to tell us about an incredible piece of work they've been doing to create a shoe with a negative impact. And for any questions, we've got LEG also from the co-team. I'm going to ask you all to, that we've got a great opportunity that we're running this event today as a webinar, but as in meeting format. So everybody has the chance to be seen and to speak if you choose to. So we can make this more of a workshop format than an us just broadcasting to you. And we'd love it to operate in that way. And sort of the first step to that is probably us knowing more about you. So please do go ahead and write in the chat, introduce yourself. If you have any questions or anything that you particularly like out of this call, please do share them there. And I'm going to hand you over to Sam, who's going to introduce you to some of the work he's been doing.
Thank you very much, Tamsin. Yeah, as Tamsin says, just butt in really with questions and things. I've got kind of a bunch of slides and I'll talk you through them and we'll talk you about the work we've been doing. But I'm much happier having a chat than a lecture. So just interrupt me and come up with questions as you feel like. Oh, Otto's left us already.
We've got a few polls that might pop up on the screen just to make it a little more interactive as well at some point.
Fantastic. So what I thought I'd do today is first talk a little bit about developing the process of developing a biodiversity strategy. And this is based on some work we did with Caring and Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership back in January, which feels like about 15 years ago now, but nevertheless was still this year. And we were basically asked by Caring, how does a fashion company develop a biodiversity strategy? So we took together a bunch of different approaches and spent some time thinking about it with them and came up with this guide, which is available on both our website and theirs. Then Alex is going to talk to you a bit about his work on his shoes. He's been creating this shoe that has I'm going to get this wrong, is it carbon positive or carbon negative technically, Alex?
I think it works both ways. I think the term's a bit loose, isn't it? You can
yeah. So literally a shoe that if you wear it, takes carbon out of the atmosphere in being produced. And we've been doing some work with him that's basically trialing this stuff, kind of right at the cutting edge of figuring out how to consider biodiversity in the design of a product. And then the last section is going to be how to take your first steps. So Tamsin earlier actually asked Biodiversity, asked our team, if we put together a template for people to help them kind of structure their thoughts and take the first steps on considering their relationship with biodiversity. So we have, hot off the press from our designer, a template for you guys to fill in, which is for your own purposes to use however you will, which essentially asks you the kind of the first questions that we would ask you if we were working with you to develop a biodiversity strategy. That should be appearing in your email in your inboxes during this talk, and you can have a look at it and we'll talk you through it and you can kind of have a think about it and ask questions and have a bit of a natter about it, really. So without much further ado, I will get on with it. So one of the first things that's really important about this kind of stuff is the process by which you develop a strategy is really important. You got to have a really structured way of putting your thinking together. Otherwise, it's quite easy to get very lost and kind of get confused or overwhelmed or, have other unpleasant things happen. And there are a few kind of principles to this. So first is strategies sit in this funny position because they've got to consider some very different types of information. It's got to be very practical and informed, but it's also got to be scientific. And it's got to have evidence and, knowledge about biodiversity in there. And they also have to sit in the middle in many ways. They have to speak to headline targets about what it is your company wants to achieve and, these big headline goals of no deforestation or no carbon input or no biodiversity impact, whatever it might be. But at the same time, they also have to inform people on the day-to-day side of things. someone who's making a shoe or who's making a jumper or a coat or whatever it might be needs to be able to pick up this strategy and go, oh yeah, great, I see what this means for the kind of toggles I'm going to use, or the kind of materials I'm going to use, or where I'm going to source them from, wherever it might be. And to achieve this, we need to kind of combine the scientific and the pragmatic. You've got to combine the best evidence you can get, and sometimes the evidence isn't as good as you might like, but deliver it in a way that you can instantly understand, and it's very practical, basically, and useful. And just to kind of, the conclusion of this is that to achieve all these things together, it's about having a process that allows you to consider these different things and weave them together into a strategy that's really helpful. So this is a quick image, which is kind of early on in this strategy document we wrote for caring. And it lays out the process in 8 not so easy steps, kind of loosely to give you a guide. And I kind of have to highlight that this is just, in practice, it may be different to this, but this is kind of the sorts of things we think you should think about. And I'm going to run through the steps in order now. So step 1 is to identify your motivations. So, what do you actually want from this? Is this about informing the decisions you're making when you're deciding what kind of materials to use in your shoe? Is this about communications? Is this part of your, your brand identity? You're going to be speaking to the public about this. Is this about being able to make quick decisions? When you're sourcing, say leather, and you've got multiple different choices about where it comes from, do you want to be able to consider biodiversity in that when you're making rapid decisions at auction houses and that kind of stuff? And there's a few different kind of key factors you might think about when trying to articulate this. The first is operational motivations, and by that I mean it's kind of fancy way really of saying stuff that's integral to the kind of functioning of your company. Pretty much every company makes something that depends on a natural process. If you're using cotton or leather or viscose or anything like this, obviously that's being produced in a natural landscape somewhere. There's a valley or a field or whatever that depends on clean, regular water, on a stable climate, on low pests, all this kind of stuff. And if all that dies, obviously that's going to suck, and your supply chain is going to fall apart. So for a lot of people, this is a really key thing to consider. You also got reputational drivers. I feel like one of the things that COVID has really identified is that we're not quite as sitting pretty as we like, and it's actually a bit more, climate change and things like this are a bit more of a threat. And so for many people, being seen as part of the solution to these problems is a really core part of how they market themselves. The other thing to note at this really early stage is half the time you're already doing a bunch of work for biodiversity, just not getting credit for it. Alex, in choosing the materials he uses in his shoe, was thinking primarily about climate change, but actually there were some biodiversity benefits in all of this anyway. And so a really key thing to start off with is identifying where you're doing stuff like this so that you can consider that as you go through the process. The next stage is to set your scope. So what decisions are you going to try and affect with this strategy? And the first thing I'd mention here is that it's really important to remember that there need to be tangible outcomes for biodiversity at some point. And that's going to be a really difficult thing to think about early on, but I think it's an important thing to not lose sight of. The next thing here is to think about who's the audience of your strategy. Is this going to be something that sits on your website? Is this going to be something you give to your designers, your supply chain managers, your manufacturers? Who's actually going to use this thing? And therefore, how do you design it so that they'll look at it and it'll make sense to them, it'll appeal to them? Another thing to think about here is your sphere of influence. What can you affect? If you're caring, obviously they're massive and have all these different brands all over the world. They've got, quite a big responsibility woven into that. But if you're making, a limited line of glasses in Canada, you're selling it in a small number of shops, well, maybe a slightly more modest strategy is more appropriate. And that's equally legitimate. And then the other thing to think about here is what is going to be the role of this strategy in decision making. And I think this is a really key thing to think about this in really practical terms. Like when you're sitting around a table or around Zoom now, I guess, thinking about how you're designing your coat or your handbag or whatever, who's there? Is it, have you got someone from marketing, someone from budget, someone from comms, someone from supply chain management? Who's there? And what are they worrying about? What kind of stuff are they thinking about? And how can you design a strategy so that they can pick it up in this room, very quickly understand the consequences of their decisions for biodiversity and get on with their lives, basically, do their jobs more effectively. And that's just kind of actually to draw further on this point is the step 3 is to consider this context in detail. And there are a few aspects to this. So one of them is where are the opportunities for change. So an example here, we're speaking to a company a little while ago who make leather shoes, and they make men's leather boots. And obviously for them, the fact they make leather boots is key to their identity. Now, I think most of us are aware that leather has a really high impact on the environment. But if that's part of your brand, there's not really much you can do about that. But what you can do is work with your suppliers. You can work with your farmers. You can work with the places you source from. You can think about the impacts that might have and how you might compensate for that. So where are the opportunities for wiggle room where they exist, and where there are opportunities for meaningful change as well. Another one is data and evidence. What do you have and what you need? And this is a kind of funny one because almost everyone goes, well, I haven't got enough evidence. I don't have enough data. And that is always going to be the case. But in many cases, you do know where to start. So, you know how much material you're sourcing. You might know where you're getting it from. And there's actually something that is very easy to help with from a biodiversity perspective. And we'll talk more about that later. Another thing to think about is your ambition. How high you're going to aim. And obviously everyone, it's good to aim high, but then it's also not the worst thing in the world to start with something bite-sized and break off something you can manage and kind of, go from there. And then the last point of this is that this is going to be an evolving context. You're originally thinking about where you're making decisions at the moment, but this is something that's going to change as you go along. This is cutting edge, this stuff. So it's going to be a case of learning, making horrible mistakes and learning from them. Sadly, I'm the one making mistakes more often than not, but such is life. So step 4 is where it starts to get meaty. This is understand your impacts and your dependencies. So your impacts are where you're having an impact on biodiversity and the environment. So here's a little example we did for caring, which is agriculture as an example of an impact driver. It is deforestation, and it causes runoff. You get habitat loss, water pollution, all this kind of stuff, all these nasty things. And it's really important to get some kind of grip on where your impacts are, and ideally in a kind of quantitative way. Even if all you can do is say number of tons of leather, you need to start to get a number on this. And this is to make sure your response is proportional to your impact. And the dependencies are the flip side of this. So, if you're having rampant deforestation and pollution, then your leather supply is going to be under threat. So where you depend on the natural world for your supply chain. And there's a few different ways of doing this. This little image here is actually, it looks like dots, but actually it's the product of a ton of work done by Caring. They call it their environmental profit and loss account. And one of the nice things about this is in some ways they've done the hard work so you don't have to. They looked at their entire supply chain and found that their main impacts were raw material production. Basically, all the damage happens at the raw material end of the supply chain. And it's kind of a funny one because I don't think many other companies are going to need to do this because it was such a conclusive result that I would be astonished if many other companies have a drastically different impact on this, although of course there will be variation. They also then break it down further. They look at their different products, materials, my apologies. And they found that leather and animal fibers and metal were by far and away the biggest sources of their impact. And this is really key because that suggests that's where they need to start their work. It's all well and good doing stuff with plant fibers and synthetic fibers and precious skins, but actually the leather and the animal fibers is where it's at. The next thing you need to do is develop a portfolio of actions. And this is a kind of a difficult one to talk about in brief terms, but there's a few different paradigms. I'd suggest something called the consultation hierarchy, which is basically avoid, minimize, restore, and transform. And you basically start by getting all the options on the table, no wrong answers. You then put together a portfolio of actions that you think will together deliver the outputs that you want. And the key here is a portfolio. It's never going to be one action. It has to be a systemic change. I think the days are kind of going where you can have one or two, sustainable lines. I think these days it's got to be more about selecting actions which act all across your organization. And you set targets, put some numbers to this. In many cases, this is where you get public about it and talk about what it is you're going to achieve. You need to do a monitoring strategy. So I won't go into too much detail here. I edited this out because I can talk for ages on this, but you need something called, well, one of the approaches one might use is a theory of change. And this is to try and track how, when you take these different actions across your company, how together do they all contribute in moving you in the direction you want to go in. Indicators, and again, these might be a wide range of different things. Some of them might be, the number of, the extent of the materials you're sourcing from, more sustainable sources or from changed practices, but they also might be social. You might look at things like the public perception of your brand. There's a wide range of things you could monitor. And also, this is always about being pragmatic. Work with the data you've got. It's better to get acting now and learn some lessons than to worry too much about getting a full picture. And the last step, always the last step, is draw it all together. Headline targets are always a winner. Everyone likes something simple and clear, and like Alex has a kind of a really clear message attached to his product, and that that's really effective. Some people lead by commitment, and by this what I mean is they say they're going to do something, and then they go away and figure out how they're going to do it, which is completely acceptable way of doing it. It's ambitious. And other people lead by strategy, in that they figure out what they think they can do, and then they say they're going to do it. And one's more prudent, one's more ambitious, both are fine. And I guess my kind of takeaway on this is to be ambitious, clear, and succinct. Strategy shouldn't be overwhelming documents. They should be things that really kind of clearly identify what it is you want to achieve and how you're going to get there, and move you forward. And then the last, I hate calling this a step because it's not a step, but is to start doing it, start implementing, start monitoring and reviewing and learning. And I guess one of my main messages on this is going to be, well, for the next 5 years at least, these are going to be living documents. Like, no one has an answer. Like, Kering released the first biodiversity strategy early this year, and it was pretty light on topic. And it's really great stuff, but it's also, it's a first step into this new world, as it were. So this is going to be a case of learning as we go, messing up horribly, and benefiting from being honest about that. So I see this as being a living document when you put a strategy together, something you review on a regular basis. And on that note, I was working with quite a few companies on this, and where we're kind of heading to with some of them is having an outward-facing document that presents your ambition, and an inward one that's much more practical. And it's guides for designers and risk assessments, all this kind of stuff. So that's probably a good point to pause my spiel and take some questions before we move on. I haven't been watching the chat, Tamsin, but I can see it flashing at me.
Yeah, so we've had a few questions which came in the lead up to the webinar, actually, before we launched, which it might be good to address. So I'm conscious that we jumped right into the detail, which I know will make some of you happy, but for others of you, it might be good to step back a little. And one of the questions we had from quite a few people was, what's the impact? Why does biodiversity matter in fashion? What's the connection? And yeah.
Sure. So I guess there are a few different ways to answer this question. The first one's really simple, which is that we're all impacting biodiversity. And by biodiversity, I literally mean all the living things on the planet. So the species, the habitats, the corals, the forests, all of this lot. And we're destroying it at a massive rate. And if we don't stop destroying it, we're all going to die in a not too distant future, like through climate change, through ecological collapse. And by that, I mean ecosystems falling apart and ceasing to function properly. So as a kind of society, not dying horribly is, quite a good reason for not impacting biodiversity. And we impact biodiversity in a wide range of ways, from pollution to destroying habitats, to over exploiting things like overfishing the fish stocks, all this kind of stuff. And so managing our impacts on that and trying to kind of not contribute, or at least limit our contribution to this global problem is I think a responsibility of pretty much all of us these days. That's quite a dramatic answer, but I hope that covers it. I mean, the other answer, the simple answer, is if a company is seen to be having massive impacts on biodiversity and dealing with it, I think the days where you can get away with that are either gone or going. More and more people being held to account. And in the age of, whilst we're in a bit of the age of fake news, we're also in the age of massive information, which means that the access people have to the consequence of these things is phenomenal these days. Is that what you're hoping
yeah,
for?
so we've had a few questions come through on the chat, but just one more from, one more from those who burning question from the sign up process. How can the fashion textile industry have a positive impact? Now we've seen in detail how through your presentation, but in a more broader, what would you see as a positive future, positive biodiverse future for the fashion industry?
Yeah, okay. So I think this is going to be about massive change, and this is going to come slowly or quickly. It's going to come, and by this I mean change across all aspects of it. So sourcing materials that have a limited impact on biodiversity or no impact on biodiversity. This might be about making clothes more resilient and last longer, so you can use less of them. So you need to take more from, supply more, and you cause less waste. This might be about reducing your carbon impact and not using things that produce a lot of CO2. This might be about pollution and reducing the amount of plastics that end up in the seas. This is going to require a massive change from across the industry, and in many ways I can talk about the big picture stuff, but this is going to be about innovation. This is going to be about people coming up with new exciting ways to things, and that's kind of a large reason why I brought Alex on, or asked Alex if he come and talk on this, is because he's right at the cutting edge of this, and I think actually in many ways he can answer that better than I can.
Yeah, well, I think you kind of touched on it there. I think there's a lot of things that are led by demand. So whether that's demand from the customers or demand from brands to their suppliers, and that's really, I think, changed over the last couple of years. Like you can see that the supplier end of things, they understand that they're going to sell more stuff if they're paying attention to the sort of biodiversity and climate side of things. So that's progressing well, and I think the more demand there is from end customers and brands, it goes back down the chain. So it's a really good starting point. And then as well, you touched on that kind of circular thing, like the end of the life of the product. That's obviously massive as well.
So just picking up a couple of questions that we've got coming through, do you think there are certain fabrics which are painted as sustainable, so almost like greenwash, which are actually a paradox when it comes to their impact?
Oh man, this is Alex's question all over.
I think
yeah,
you've
absolutely.
covered as well on the emails you've done, the common objective things. I think the way you've covered different things like bamboo, and where you've talked about, different versions of it. So if there's like viscose materials where they're chemically broken down and reconstituted, there's a different impact if it's used in a more raw state. So everything's got a bit of a complicated story which needs a bit of digging into, and it's maybe not always communicated very clearly by brands because they want a quick thing for customers to go, okay, that's fine, I'm comfortable with that. But I think that's where work that like Sam's doing is really important, because it gives like a bit of like a real depth and scientific analysis of the actual background and consequence of these materials. And there's always trade-offs as well. So it's whether it's the impact at the growing stage, but then also is it going to be long lasting? So definitely lots of trade-offs there, and it depends on the product and all sorts. So I think you need to really look at what your product requirements are, and then what you want to achieve as a brand, and then do a lot of research really.
Yeah, I think sadly there isn't a quick answer. I think that what we've learned from working with Alex is that it requires quite a lot of research to really understand the nuance of this stuff. And when brands come out and say, "Oh, this is a sustainable thing," or we're now sustainable, whatever, it often makes me quite dubious, because I know how much work goes into that, and I'm not entirely convinced they've done the enormous amount of homework that was required to really be sure about this. I mean, yeah, as a general rule, there are some that are worse than others. Leather's particularly bad. But then it's a complicated picture, because some people would say that leather's more durable, and doesn't pollute in the same way. So I guess it's a complicated thing to answer, really.
Another question for you, Sam, and if you wouldn't mind having a quick look at the chat, also I've got a question for you. But the question from Alicia, can you explain the concept of biodegradability? Much confusion there is around the subject, and I believe that you may be able to explain that exactly, what it means to be biodegradable from an agricultural perspective.
So literally, it means, will it break down into nothing, essentially. So what I mean by this, in the same way that if you had a potato on the side and you left it in your kitchen for a long time, it would rot and break down into constituent components. Basically, you'd end up with nothing that resembled a potato at the end of it. And you'd end up, in fact, with compost, which you could then plant in your garden, and your garden would thrive and grow from. Whereas if you put a plastic bottle on the side, it'll sit there like a plastic bottle for the next thousands upon thousands of years. It's never going to become a smaller, lesser thing. So that's the simple answer, really. Will living things break it down into nothing and then reuse it as part of them, or will it persist in that form for the foreseeable future?
Upcycling and recycling, is one better than the other in terms of consumer textile waste? What's the best way to go about a circular model?
So I think this has got to be seen as part of a bigger picture. To me, upcycling and recycling are actions you might take as part of a wider strategy. You can't just do one part of this. It's got to be the whole thing altogether. So I would say that within that wider context, one might be better than the other, but I think objectively, kind of just on its own, one can't point at one and particularly say that's a better approach.
So this is a good one. How are brands incorporating nature-based solutions? Some examples and strategies. And I wonder if this is a chance for Alex to share what you're doing and give us an intro to what you've done with the shoe.
Yeah. Do your spiel, Alex.
Yeah, I think I'll cover it. So I'll go through. So thanks for the intro and inviting me on here, Sam. I'm the co-founder of Aspect Climate Projects. So we're a new shoe brand that's going to be launching in the next few weeks or months, hopefully not too long. A few things to sort out, which is quite difficult at the time being, but we're getting there. And we're going to be producing unisex trainers produced in England. So Sam invited me on to kind of talk through the process that we'd been through and how we'd work with Biodiversify to create what we think is a shoe brand that's better for the climate. So giving a bit of background about us. So I'm a footwear designer and developer, and I've always been interested in conservation and the environment. So this has kind of brought those interests together nicely for me. And my business partner, Dominic, is the fourth generation shoemaker, and he works in his family factory up in Sheffield, and so he's got a real expertise in shoe production. So we were discussing about 18 months ago now, probably, about launching something new and doing how can we produce shoes that are better for the world. So we felt with our backgrounds and his ability to experiment in-house in his own factory, we could do something really interesting. So the first question we asked ourselves was, what did better for the world actually mean? And we've kind of touched on this here a little bit. So saying, what does sustainability mean? And you see this word like on an hourly, daily basis now, like everyone's saying it, and it's used interchangeably between plant-based, recycled, long-lasting, vegan, sometimes almost with no justification. It's just a word that's used a lot now. And we felt it definitely wasn't being used in terms of what it actually means, because there's an amount of product being produced still that the world can't keep up with. And a lot of the messages going to consumers customers is that we should just continue consuming. We should consume buy our way out of this issue. And that's just encouraging overconsumption, which got us into the problem in the first place. So we felt that although there's a lot of progress being made within fashion, there's definitely a huge amount of scope to go a lot deeper and understand more about what sustainability meant. So for us, our first decision was that we'd make climate change our core focus, because we felt like this is an area that had the biggest opportunity in terms of product, but also, it's the biggest challenge facing us on the planet now. So that's why we chose that. And the other point was that we would consider literally every element of the product. So we wanted to look at the whole thing, the whole business, so that we could have the biggest possible impact. So specifically in terms of the product, what this meant was breaking it down to every component. So we, not just the visible one, not just saying we've used this sole and this upper. We wanted to go literally everything. So we're looking at the padding used, the thread, the reinforcements, all the structural elements of the shoe, and shoes are pretty complex, so it's quite a lot to look at. So next we researched a lot of different materials, and we started engaging with suppliers. And this maybe touches on some of the questions. Something that's really interesting at this point was the opportunity to look at both like pioneering new materials, people like innovating and trying to bring plant-based solutions to replace other things. But also there's a lot of traditional materials which had amazing natural properties but aren't really used so much nowadays. So things like coconut husks, which actually used more in bedding, mattresses, but they have these amazing properties and not really used in shoes. So explored that quite a bit. And also cork is another great example of that. So traditional, like using quite formal shoes, but got some great properties that we could use as well. So at this stage, this is where having this real clear vision about what we wanted the brand to be was really useful, because if we just said that we want to be a sustainable brand, it's totally open to interpretation. We could take that in loads of different directions. But by saying we want to be, make the best possible product for its impact on climate change, that allowed us to make really coherent decisions. So, for example, this thing about leather. So we understand, we've worked with footwear long enough, we understand that technically leather is a brilliant material for making long-lasting shoes. But seeing as our mission was to make a shoe that's better for the climate, we ruled out leather because its production, the meat and leather production releases tons of greenhouse gases, uses loads of water. So that was a quite clear decision for us. Next, we decided we'd go plant-based materials because they sequester CO2, and that's our end goal as well. And then more specifically, we wanted to work with materials that came from trees, because the trees stay in the ground, you harvest the plants in the trees and they continue sequestering CO2. So that was the next decision for us. And then this maybe touches a little bit on the question about upcycling, is we wanted to use waste materials as much as possible. So we used pineapple leaves, coconut husks, apple pulp, these materials which would have been waste from food production. And so by using them, there was no need for any extra water, land or fertilizer to produce our materials. So when you go through it, it feels quite a lot of like we've made a lot of obvious decisions. And so a question could be, why isn't this industry norm? And Sam touched upon this a bit, but my feelings on it as well are that the biggest impacts of a product are determined by the designer, because they specify the materials that are used. And a difficulty that designers typically have within companies is there's loads of different conflicting demands, and therefore focusing on sustainability is a real challenge. So some examples are that, like price point, for example, everyone's, you've got to hit a price, but using better materials for the climate typically costs a little bit more. So do they have the flexibility to do that? There's also time pressures, obviously. So to get samples made quicker, for production to be quicker, and that's just not easy. Like if you want to look at every element of a product, it just takes a lot longer to do. So by breaking everything down, this has taken us, year to 18 months, when normally you'd be expected to turn around products in, a matter of weeks or months. And then another issue is how clearly has the brand defined what they mean by sustainability, and what the decision-making process the designer should be making. And then on top of it, it's complicated. You need quite a deep understanding of things, and they're quite complex issues. So you need time to get your head around that. And you consider that brands would do hundreds of products per season, and all of these challenges apply to all of these products. Like, it's a huge task. So I think that's where it's a real challenge for people at the moment. And that's where, for us, we're in a lucky position, because we had a small team, there's 2 of us. So we were completely aligned with what we wanted to do. We were the founders, but also the people getting into the tiny details. So we're in a really unique position there. And also we had an advantage that we wanted to focus on one product to begin with. We weren't having to do a huge range of different things. So that's really helpful. So this kind of leads us to the point where we linked up with Biodiversify. So once we got to the point of having our full shoe, we made the samples, tested them. So we had full information on every material that went into every component of our shoe and where it came from. So we handed that information to Biodiversify, and they did a biodiversity and climate risk assessment for us on all these materials. And this was great because it gave us a complete impartial overview of the effectiveness of our decisions and the impact of our materials on these factors. So as well as reviewing what we've done and giving us a real good analysis of that, it also was an amazing thing because it gave us awareness of where we can improve upon things. So as a good example of this was on our soles, our outsoles. So my first conversation with Sam, he had this really nice vision, which I maybe hadn't considered so much before, because we'd been really focusing on the climate. And he said how if you're focusing on the climate, improvements to biodiversity should go hand in hand. They can work together. And so this example of our soles is that we wanted to use natural rubber because it's got amazing properties. It's hard wearing, it's soft, it's flexible. We avoid using plastic, and also it comes from trees, so they're sequestering CO2. We thought, happy days. But it's a more complicated issue than that. And through their analysis, they highlighted how if you're sourcing from certain areas, there's a real risk to habitat destruction from the plantations and whatnot. So when they raised this issue, we were able to highlight this within our supply chain and dig a lot deeper into where it was coming from. And we actually switched to a different supplier who could get FSC certified rubber. And that just gave us that much more confidence in that element of a product. Another thing that was great was that it was really useful for us internally in terms of our product, but it also gave us a lot of meaningful independent analysis that we could present to our customers. And nowadays, I think that's really important for two main reasons. One is that almost every brand now claims to be sustainable. Everyone's got a message on it, and it can be something that customers like, yeah, tick, they're sustainable. I can buy this product. I'm comfortable. And in reality, there's a lot of evidence lacking with a lot of these brands. So I think these independent reviews are great because they allow people that are genuinely doing things to communicate that to the customers. Another reason is that there's an increase in transparency now from brands. And I think that's a really good, important step. People are talking about where things are made and what they're made from, but this is really complicated. And without applying a lot of context to that, is pretty meaningless, I'd say, to customers. Like, what does it mean to them if something comes from here? What's made from this? Like, we've already had the question about what's a good fabric to use. Like, it needs a lot of in-depth information. So these independent reviews really help customers to understand a lot more about these complex issues. And all this extra information, I think, empowers people to make decisions that they understand their impact and they can buy with much more confidence. So yeah, like that's what we're at really. Like we feel like we've created a new way to make shoes, which is better for the climate. And yeah, by working with Biodiversify, I think it's helped us to further improve what we've done and also given us real good tools to present that to our customers. So yeah, it's been good.
Alice, could you show us the shoe? And just to I'm sure most people have some familiarity with Zoom now, but you can view as gallery view or speaker view. And if you go on speaker view, you'll see the shoe close up and see a bit more. And we've had a request to post, if you have a website or a link which people could have a look at, if you could post that in the chat.
Yeah, we'll do. I mean, we like I said, we're like just about to get
Show us the shoe.
I couldn't see that.
Show us the shoe. Show us the shoe.
So it's a trainer, unisex. So it's like we wanted to do something that's like very easy to wear, but distinctive and interesting. So we're doing a few different materials. This one's from the material that's got a high percentage of pineapple in the upper, and then the other one is this one is it's got the apple pulp material in the upper of this one. So yeah, our website is pretty much done. We're just finalizing the details. The information from Sam's team is quite in-depth, which is great, but it's quite a little bit of putting together. So we're just finalizing that, but the website's there so people can sign up, and we'll keep that up to date when it launches. And we've got a little Instagram account as of last night, so you can engage with us, and then we'll keep you up to date with when we launch over the next few weeks, hopefully. But yeah, what I think we wanted to focus on from the start was explaining about every material we'd used and every decision. So we'd already done a lot of in-depth information about what we'd used, and then we're going to apply the report from Stan's team to kind of back it up and explain a bit more about the background to things. So we'll be there soon.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing it up there. And
Yeah.
I also have to note that it wasn't me who did this. It was Daisy Snook and Michael Burgess on our team, who claim all the credit for the hard work behind this. I just happened to be the one talking about it. Um, it was a really interesting process as well, though, because there's loads of nuances in it. So, like, one of my favorite examples was the rubber that comes from Vietnam. And what Daisy found was that Vietnam had, until I think 2006, defined rubber trees as forest, and they used this as kind of a cheat to like deforest a bunch of beautiful growth forest and put rubber plantation instead. And that only got fixed in 2006. So historically, rubber had a really high impact on biodiversity, which is interesting because it's also really low carbon impact. So you've kind of got this challenging trade-off of which one do you pick, especially because if you're looking at what effect you're going to have on the system, the areas, if Vietnam keeps its deforestation halted or stops it, then potentially actually that land's already gone. So you're not causing any more impact. But if loads of people buy rubber from Vietnam, then that may well cause more of a threat on the forest that remains. So what we found is, in many cases, this is nuanced. There isn't a simple, quick answer. It's a complicated thing, and that's kind of partly why we're really making the case this stuff needs to be thought about in a kind of holistic way.
Yeah, and I think further to that is that if it wasn't being used for rubber, what would it be used for? Is it going to return to rainforest? More likely, it's going to be used for palm oil, which is more harmful. There's lots of trade, it's like a web of decisions.
Exactly, it's not a simple thing, sadly, and that's why we've kind of been putting together, this holistic risk assessment thing. So I noticed we're running out of time.
We're running out of time. Have we time for one more question?
Should we? I thought maybe we should talk about this biodiversity template we put together and then do some questions after that. Would that be okay?
Good plan.
So Eddie is now going to share, I hope, in the chat a link to a biodiversity template, ambition template that we put together for Common Objective. And this is basically something that we designed to help people take their kind of first steps into us putting together a kind of comprehensive relationship with biodiversity for their company. And you can download it and read it along as I talk if you like, or you can listen to me and then download it afterwards. That'll all be on the website later on as well. I think we will have a slightly refined version soon, but nevertheless. So the thought behind this was, we understand it's hard to get started. What do you do? What do you even think about? So this template basically lays out some of the first questions that we'd ask a client when working with them to understand their biodiversity impacts. This is going to be on the website, and we particularly thought this would be useful and linked to the biodiversity pledges that I think are going to be part of CO's other wider work. And we're obviously happy to help people translate these things into more comprehensive strategies in the same way that we have with Alex. Often we find that understanding these nuances requires a kind of, robust approach, I guess I might say. So the first bit on the template is ethos and identity. So who are you? What's your brand identity? What are you about? What's your ethos, quite literally? And a key part of this is, what's your relationship with nature? So, Alex really kind of fantastically explained how his shoe kind of came about and what's the kind of the dream behind it. But of course, there's loads of different ways that companies relate with nature. You might draw inspiration from it. You might have it as a core principle. You might have designs that mimic animals or fabric or trees or whatever. So it's really a good thing to identify these things up front, because it helps weave a thread through all of this. You can see much more from a kind of, almost an emotional sense, why your brand would improve this relationship. Drawing these connections is just really powerful, I think. It makes it really relevant. The next box in the template is about ongoing work. So, like I've already said, many companies are already doing things. You're already doing stuff as a benefit of biodiversity. You might as well get credit from it, for it, and also build upon it. Identifying these actions also helps you develop a robust strategy, because you can create a strategy that weaves these things together and gives you a kind of clear vision for how they connect to deliver something meaningful in the long term. I'll put a few examples here, but to be honest, this is a massive long list. This is a very innovative field. The other nice thing about this is if you can identify stuff you're already doing, this helps demonstrate your commitment. Like, obviously some of us have got a longer, it's a bit of a journey for all of us, and some of it's going to be more challenging, but it's going to be a lot easier if you can demonstrate you've already taken steps, you've already done things that maybe came at a cost, because you think this is important. And that's going to, I think, be a key part of your kind of public image. Corporate context. So how does this fit within your wider company operations? And I think this is a really good space to kind of identify a bit more clearly what we're dealing with here. How big is your company? What kind of materials do you use? What quantity? Who's your market? Where do you source from? How do you make decisions? This kind of stuff. And a big part of this is to kind of identify what scale of action is going to be needed to kind of mitigate this impact. You want to make sure that you're not doing a couple of token projects somewhere, but actually you're doing something that is relevant to the size of your company and the size of your impact. The next box is scope. And this is, I think, you'll see this is a lot of stuff that's reflected in the thing we did for caring. What actions are you going to take? What do you hope to achieve? Have you got headline goals, big, bold things you wish to try and achieve? I really like Alex's target of having a carbon positive or negative shoe. That my apologies, Alex. I feel like it's a really, for anyone who's not as dumb as I am, it's a very nice, simple goal. And I think a key thing here is try and be practical. Identify concrete things if you can, or vocalize or I guess express things that are actually achievable, and be respectful of the fact this takes time. You don't have to achieve everything overnight. Your company ambition. So this doesn't necessarily have to be something you can achieve easily. This might be more about your aspirations. Where do you want to get to? Do you want to be a company that has a positive impact on the climate? That's an entirely achievable thing, but that might not be something you can achieve straight away. It's good to dream, I guess is what I'm saying. And part of this is about where are you going to begin? Where are you going from? Where you'd like to go? The sections on there about milestones as well. How do you anticipate tracking your progress? And I think this is an important thing to think about, because that gives you something you can break off and work towards in the short term. And then the last little thing I wanted to say, because I want to get onto the questions, because quite frankly, they're more interesting than hearing me talk, is that transitioning from ambition to action is no small feat. And I keep banging on about this holistic approach, but I really think that's important. I think developing a biodiversity strategy from your ambition, using that as the seed, the beginning of a fully fledged biodiversity strategy, is core to doing this. Looking at your impacts and dependencies is complicated, but actually I think really, really important. And it's incredible what Alex has done in terms of going through every single material. Half these materials I've even heard of. I didn't know you can make shoes from apple cores. That's entirely new to me. And the other key thing is understanding where you can act. You've got to start somewhere. And it's important, I think, to not get distracted by how big this is, but actually identifying things you can do in the short term. I think that's the end of my thing. Yeah, jolly good. Should we go back to questions now?
Yes, and thank you. And just to remind everyone that we would love to hear from you direct. So if you want to put up your hand, we can also give you the microphone, and feel like this is a room full of lots of people. And Alex, I sent a couple of questions to you. I don't know if you are able to answer those. We've had a burning question from Peter Gauls on what dyes you're using, and then from Aroa. And anyone else, please post your questions or raise your hand.
Yeah, so the dyes thing applies to, like, we don't dye the shoe ourselves. It's like all the components are dyed. So it varies by every component. Like, where possible, we've tried to avoid dyes. So like the laces are a natural colour. Let's pull this out. The footbed is like undyed, coconut and cork. Obviously the internals. Like an example of the Pinatex is pineapple material upper. They use like a pigment dye, so there's no wastage. It's got approved. So it's like a complicated thing because everything has got its own story. But where possible, we've either tried to avoid dyes, and that includes our packaging, or trying to use where possible like vegetable-based dyes. And yeah, be careful as possible with things. The question from Aurora was quite complicated, I think.
Yes, I've sent that to Sam as well in case you need some help.
But I think it's it's
I need some help.
quite depth. So I think like our focus was of trying to work with plant-based materials to encourage and contribute to those economies that are using those materials. So I think cork is a really nice example where they're quite old forests. The trees are harvested in a way that helps them sequester even more carbon by having an economy, using that economy. It encourages those trees to stay in the ground and continue doing that work. So I think there's a lot about the material selection end of things. Another feature of our brand is that we, for every pair we sell, we're working with gold standard carbon offsetting schemes to offset a ton of CO2 per pair. So it's really high. Like a lot of brands are saying, oh, we've done this really in-depth calculation and our shoes are like 13 kilograms of carbon dioxide. It's like, it's so accessible to offset a significant amount. And I kind of feel like it can be quite, you're going into the details for the sake of details to present that sort of information. We kind of approach it differently. We're saying that, our goal is to make a brand and a product that's better for the world. So to kind of share our success of it, because I think if you're purely offsetting, you're kind of trying to bring this down, so you have to spend a bit less offsetting. It's hard to kind of understand the goals, whereas we're kind of saying we want to win with the climate. So and these schemes are great. There's things about reducing deforestation, different types of energy production which reduce the release of greenhouse gases in the first place. So there's lots of different things that are quite accessible there. So I think for a brand of our size, which is obviously tiny, we can have a fairly significant impact for our size, and it's accessible. We don't have to be going, planting trees ourselves, or you can support these existing schemes. I think it's using those tools that are around you to make the impact you can yourself.
Yeah, to be honest, that's I think somewhat of a more nuanced and in-depth answer than I can provide in many ways. I guess the only thing I'd add to that is that there are some kind of thought leaders in this. Alex is definitely one, Caring is another. But I think what's unusual about what Alex is doing is he's going into every component and really thinking it through in great detail. And that's kind of partly why I was keen to work with him in the first place, is it's this kind of really considered approach that I think is key. Because there aren't very many easy answers. I think the carbon offsetting is a really good one, but I think it has to be, doing the homework basically. And I mean, Caring have said they're going to offset 1 million hectares of land, I believe, in their biodiversity strategy, and they're going to put 1 million hectares into regenerative agriculture. And these are fantastic ambitions. But I mean, it kind of remains to be seen exactly how it's going to work. And I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what they do, really.
So we've only got a few minutes left, and I'd like to navigate to the COAST site and show you where you can get some more answers to some of the questions that have been asked and make use of it. Sam or Alex, do you have anything else to say before I move into that?
No, go for it.
I think I've offered quite enough.
Great. And all of the resources that we've shared and the brilliant slides and the template will also be available on COAST. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a sec. Also to add that in these last few minutes, often we find that one of the most effective benefits from these events is the connections made between people. So if you have things to share, you're doing things that you think others should know about, feel free to use this session and the chat to share those and put links in. Okay, so here we're looking at my code dashboard right now. Now I'm presuming that most people in the room are members of the COAST site, since most of you came through our network, but if you're not, you can join at commonobjective.co. It's free to join. You can create an individual profile, and then you can also create a business profile free of charge. And one of the reasons why we're keen to work with Biodiversify and with the template that has been shared with you is that we want to be able to boost businesses on Co that are operating in a more biodiverse way. So the way the site works is there's two algorithms behind it. One is a matching algorithm. So you specify when you sign up, you specify what you're interested in. So you can see I'm on my dashboard. This is what the sign up process is. But at any point you can go back to these preferences on the dashboard and you can specify what it is you're interested in. The site matches you with information. You can go into quite a lot of detail. So in here, I can say what products, what sustainability considerations I'm interested in. You can mention biodiversity here, and you can get matched and connected with information or organizations, be it suppliers or individuals or experts. And the second algorithm that governs the way the site works is a weighting algorithm. So it's sustainability weighting. So when you create your business profile, the more information you enter around sustainability and the services and the impact you're having, the higher your search ranking is. And we wanted to be able to factor biodiversity into that. So you can now upload the template. Once you've gone through the process and completed a template using the resource that Sam shared, you can upload that to your Co profile, and that can increase your ranking. And also to mention that we are launching our awards this week. I'll show you how those work on the site also. But they're a means that we can put the spotlight on businesses that are operating in a sustainable way and pioneering in best practice. So I'm going to start by showing you the Biodiversity Hub. Again, put questions in the chat. We've got 4 minutes left, so I can take you to things that you might need answered to on the site. But if I navigate to the Biodiversity Hub here, this is this event that we're doing now, and all the content on here is thanks to a partnership we have with Caring, which has sponsored this Biodiversity Hub, which includes a whole lot of resources on here. There's a masterclass which gives you how you can take action, a broader perspective. You can watch that on there. And then some of the case studies that Sam mentioned, the ways that Caring has approached this are on here too. And we're continually adding to this, and we will add the article from today, which includes the recording and the resources. And we're also looking for organizations to be housed in this hub. At the moment, it's mainly organizations that are supporting the sector. You can see Biodiversify is here, but we'd like to be including suppliers and brands too. And in order to do that, we need to know that you have a biodiversity policy. So by creating the policy template, you can then upload that to your profile. So I'm just going into Biodiversify to show you. Here's Sam, and you can connect with him right here. And use an individual, it's a bit like a LinkedIn, so I can connect, and it gives me a little guidance as to how I should connect. So hopefully you'll get a flurry of messages through Co after this, Sam. And Alex, I hope you will join too. Now you can create a profile for your business. It doesn't need to be an established business. It can be early stage. We have students and consultants who are creating profiles on Co. And we do also with the awards, except we have a number of awards set aside for businesses at the very innovative and at idea stage. So I'm just going to show you an example of a brand or a brand profile here. To show you where you might upload your biodiversity template. It's a little slow because I'm on Zoom at the same time, but here's Indigenous, which is an incredible brand in the US. They have won an award. So they've got their little award logo here. To enter the awards, all you need to do is create a profile. Your profile is your application. So whether or not you're successful for the awards, it's not a wasted time. I know many of you probably have had the same experience of entering awards or grants or applications. You need to do a lot to get there, and it feels like a wasted effort. I think somebody might be unmuted there. We're hearing some background noise. So yes, you can, all you have to do is create your business profile. So whether or not you're successful with the awards, it's a worthwhile exercise because your business is getting out there. We have over 30,000 members on Co now, And last month we had 250,000 page views in the month. And that's just growing exponentially, largely because of the content. We've got over 300 resources. So you can see on the back end, it's quite intuitive. You can create a profile and you can upload. So you can see Indigenous have uploaded things in reports and policies. They've uploaded their roadmap. You can upload your template, biodiversity template here, which will give you an added point and increased search ranking. So you'll see when I went to suppliers, Indigenous came up second. And the reason is because they've spent time populating that profile. Just to show you some of the other resources we've got in here, in a whole lot of detail. The sustainability issues will answer some of the questions that you may have had that were raised around upcycling or recycling. And also the 3D business suite I call out particularly because we have a roadmap around general sustainability for your business that you again can also upload to increase the ranking for your business. And just finally to show you the awards, because we're literally and if you're on the Co site, you'll also be on our mailing list, so you'll get an invite. But you can see examples of, the winners from last year. This has just been updated as we speak, so this now has all the information hot off the press on this year's how to apply. But you can see who were the winners last year. You can apply to be these are some of the brands that won in the top 10, and we also have a Co-Leadership Award, which is much broader. Our goal is to award as many businesses as possible. We don't have a maximum or a minimum. We're just looking for businesses to meet at least 4 out of these 6 criteria. All the details are here. And if you meet all 6, excel in 6 out of 6, you have the opportunity to be a part of the Co-10, which is 10 businesses that get a lot of press and promotion across the industry. And if you're not running a business or just interested, it's also worth checking out some of the award winners because they're pretty amazing. They go all the way across the supply chain, from startups to established brands, from the field to the high street. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour. I'm going to stop sharing and just check whether we have any burning questions before we end the session, because we're now just about out of time. Yeah, quite a few questions have come through here. I'd like to be able to connect with people. Thank you for sharing this information. Brilliant, brilliant. Yes, so absolutely connect through LinkedIn, but do create a profile. If we can include individuals in the Biodiversity Hub on Co. So you can connect that way. We can tag you in that hub if you're specifically interested, and then you can find other people who've been in this webinar. Okay, I think we're 3 minutes past. Any final words? Any kind of final words from either of you on ways that you think those people who are in this session could take steps in their roles towards biodiversity? I
guess I'd say reach out to us. Have a go at the template, see how you get on, and if you want some support, that's what we do.
Yeah, I'd vouch for that. It definitely was useful for us. I think that having a lot of the principles that Sam discussed, I think are really good. Like having a clear vision of what you want to achieve is a great starting point. So you can, make your decision-making process easier, and you can, you know where you're starting from. So I think that's the main thing that helped us. So I'd suggest that people follow that.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. So much. Gems of nuggets of gold in the session. Thank you everybody for participating, and hope to see you at the next one and on the Co site.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.